And we're live. How are we doing this week, Hugo?
Hey, yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Shawn. How are you?
I'm doing good. I thought a short, sharp, professional start this week instead of the fumbly. I want to give it a go. Normally it's fumbly and awkward, and I want it to be slick and very professional.
That's probably the best we've done today,
Yeah,
I'd say.
I know. I wonder why it is that when we speak less, it's better. That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. There's something to that.
It might be. We just need to be here silent and people might be happier.
Yeah.
How's everything going this week with you, mate?
Yeah, great. Thanks, buddy. Had a chaotic week. I think we both had chaotic weeks.
Yeah.
Speaking off camera before coming on. Mine, I have to say, in a good way. There's been a huge amount of work on the property investing side of the business, and we kind of finally exchanged on a pub we've been working on for months. So we now got a pub that was derelict and has been for some time. It's in a really great location, and we're going to convert that into 6 flats. So that's a really exciting project for us. I'm jumping straight into the deep end into property investing, and as you know, it's the only way, the only Huw way.
Yeah.
We've got another one that we're going to start work on, which is way more straightforward, but we're going to start work on that within the next 2 weeks. So that's really exciting. So this time next week, I'm likely not to be on this podcast because I'll be up looking at the pub, and I'll do some video shots of like before and after, so I can share them and take some photos and stuff. So yeah, mate, been a really hectic week. I've got stuff to do after this call as well, but it's hectic in a good way.
You know what I should have done? I should have actually opened it with. I should have jumped right in with this. We should have just started this way. All right. All right. I should have. That should have been the first thing in. So you said 6 units. You're going to be turning that into.
So yeah, the one that we'll start work on next year. The reason it will be next year, by the way, is there is a tenant in situ, and with COVID, we are not permitted to boot him out. He gave the vendor who we purchased it from his word that he'd be out, but actually, because of circumstances, that isn't the case. So we've been allowed up to a year to start work on it. So yeah, so once he's out and sorted, then we'll be able to move on it. But we've got 12 months to start on that. The other one is going to be a pub into 5 flats. This one has actually been vandalized as well. It was on fire a few years ago. So it's one that we're going to bring back to life. So I'm really excited about that. And that's the one I'm going to see next weekend.
So are you looking to, this is going to be part of a larger portfolio. So you're looking to turn this into a longer term investment. I think if I remember you said that's what you were looking to do. So you're not looking to flip these. You're looking to make a revenue stream on these.
That's it, mate. Absolutely. Yeah, my publishing business is my main form of business. I've got my stocks and shares, which tick over really nice in the background. I don't touch them. I just reinvest all the dividends and grow that and contribute to it. So this is just a separate stream of income. And I've joined a course to kind of help me, because I'm brand new to it. I've never done this before. And the property world is massive. I could teach you in under an hour how to invest very safely and very like a really solid return on stocks and shares. I could do that in an hour. Property, not so much. Like it's been a long time. I've really had to educate myself. So I've been talking about it for probably about 3 years now, and I've been learning and trying things and looking at different strategies. And to finally be there now is really exciting, mate. So it's been a long time coming. There's still, shitloads of work to do, but yeah, I'm really excited, mate, and looking forward to kind of sharing this with people. But the goal is long-term capital growth and income, and playing the long game.
Yeah, well, I think that's, if you can, I think that's a great move, because you can. I think that it would be higher risk. My impression, it'd be higher risk to be able to take on a place with the intention of flipping it, because you're very, very dependent on the current market trends. Whereas if you can play the long game, then you can, you can build up a portfolio that's paying you a regular income. But then when you're finished, you can then cash in your chips and retire.
Absolutely. The flipping, just the basic kind of premise behind that is when you're on an up market, flipping is the way forward. When you're on a down market, it's not an ideal strategy, as you just said. And with COVID, be so much uncertainty, we're not through this yet. People are still feeling the pinch and are up against it. I think if anything, the market is more than likely to find a dip in the next 6 months than anything else, or maybe more like the 3 or 4 months once the stamp duty changes. So yeah, no, we're looking for the long term and on the income front. So I'm excited to share with you, mate, as we go through this.
Yeah. Would you look to flip something, flip a property, if you were looking for, let's say you had a set of properties? Would you use flipping as a means to generate more income to invest in another property?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, spot on. So we, me and my business partner primarily are looking for the long term, but we wouldn't, like, let's say, for example, there is a bit of a dip and then we get the vaccine and everything starts to turn around and then the market gets excited. If there's a bigger, sexier, more interesting, more profitable project on the works that's out of our current budget, one option would be to sell some or all of the units to then go in again. It's all that return on investment and comparison. So we're definitely open to it, but that's not our primary motive. So it's nice to be, I think, flexible and have those options.
Well, it's going to be really interesting from my end to watch this progress for you, because I know how long you've been studying, and it's been, I think, for the last 2 years you've talked about doing this, and it's gone by really quick to get to this point where you've got a pub now that you're converting into those flats. So we're going to be over the course of the next year asking for updates just to see how you're progressing on that front.
Oh, you'll get them, mate. Yeah, for sure. I'll be happy to share them with you and for our viewers as well, for those that are interested. So yeah, very, very excited, mate. And thank you for kind of asking about it and all the well wishes you've given. Yeah,
well, it's as one of your mates, it's just something that I want to see it go well for you, and it's something you've talked about for a while. And I think there's value for other people. I'm going to take this section of our broadcast and split it off into a separate piece. So people can get updates on this without having to troll through maybe some of the other stuff they'd be less interested in. If you're happy with that as well.
Of course I am. Yeah. More than happy.
So
how are you doing then? Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. Then, I think I said briefly, I'm not going to go too much chapter and verse, but work has been extremely stressful. It's probably one of the most stressful weeks I've had in the last 5 years at work. And this weekend I've really focused on wasn't my choice. It was at the request is too soft a word. It was at the demand of my wife that I don't do any work this weekend because I'm so far behind on everything. And the people that I work with, I don't know. The person that I work for doesn't necessarily appreciate I work for somebody who doesn't do my job, who makes demands of me in my job. And I'm so far behind in my job, and it's a promoted job that I know I'm doing a good job in, but it doesn't seem that way because of all the other stuff I can't do because of the stuff that's being asked of me. And it puts you in a position where you want to say, fuck it, I'm out. I'm just going to go back to what I was doing. But then you kind of feel like you're ruining your career. This is your opportunity. And you kind of feel like you're allowing a narrative that isn't true be perpetuated in those situations. And that's sort of what I've been dealing with this week. So I've been doing my best to try to shield away from that, and we'll deal with that on Monday morning. It's been difficult, but it's been good. It's been a good weekend, and I'm glad I've switched off. As we get closer to Monday, it's there, and it's going to take a lot for me not to go onto my email and start working tonight, which sounds weird. It's not like I want to work, but you also want to do a good job. You want to represent your brand well. So that's this whole broadcast has been very looked forward to for me, because it's just another chance to just chat and take your mind off of everything.
It is.
But I shared a video with you this week, actually, that I saw, and it was one of those things where it wasn't something that was on my radar. It was something that I had opinions for in the past. And I got to stop going off camera here. There you go. Make sure I'm in. Get the moneymaker in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I saw a video. I'm not going to share the video just because of, I guess, copyright, or I saw this link, and I put the link into the description on the YouTube channel. I don't think it's in on the Periscope channel. And actually, let me get a little banner up in case anybody wants to comment.
Check that up.
And this interview was about somebody who was an illicit drug user, heroin, and also opioids, I think.
Yeah.
And I guess the story hinged on one major element where she ended up selling her closest friend some drugs, who he then overdosed using. And she was looking at with the minimum maximums, I think it is, was looking at potentially 20 years in prison for selling her friend drugs. And she is the commissioner. It's Morgan Godwin. There's not much you can find on her. And I want to put into context, if you do watch this thing, there's a lot of stuff she cited as far as data, which is somewhat true, but it's still subject to further research because there's not a lot of data back from her referencing Portugal. So in this interview, she makes the point that we're spending a lot of money on criminalizing people when actually they have a problem and need treatment. And we need to put that money and invest that money into fixing it, not throwing them away. And she makes the point that incarceration gives an illusion that you're safer. And she said that's, in her opinion, she said that's a lie. And she's very invested in this. And I think she's, I really love what she's doing. So I'm not being critical of her, but I also want to make sure I'm putting into context that this discussion isn't a black and white.
Yeah.
This is her opinion, and she's got a personal connection, which benefits, but also, for the sake of the debate, she's going to be very, biased to her view. And, yeah, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, what's interesting with all this as well, Shawn? It's a fascinating topic, actually. I'm keen to get into it with you. Is the importance of really coming from a frame of reference that I've smoked marijuana, haven't done so for a huge number of years, and I've that's been it. I've been too scared. I'd be too scared to take cocaine, too scared to go down that route. So from that point of view, I'd never even go near that stuff. So it's never been in my life. I've never really been associated. I know people that have gone down that path, and I know where they're at now, which is quite sad. But this is really an alien world to me, and I think we mentioned it on a previous episode that you should really walk a mile in someone's shoes before you judge them. It's really interesting to hear a past user and someone that's actually been negatively impacted by this. With that being said, just stepping away from my own reference, 20 years for selling a friend, like a small, basically I don't know what you call it, the dose that she's given, rather than a substantial dealer, it just doesn't seem to warrant a crime, and seems really odd. But I'd love to get your take on this whole situation, because my gut feel is I think we're going to feel very similar on this one.
Yeah. I before seeing this, I was questioning aloud, why are we imprisoning people who are drug users? Because at the end of the day, we don't imprison people that are gambling addicts, and we don't imprison people that are alcoholics unless they crash a car or do something that potentially could hurt somebody else.
Food addicts
as well.
Yeah.
And you could even argue that there's people that are addicted to fast food that are more of a strain on the health, the medical institutions in everybody's country.
I'd agree. Yeah.
But when I saw this, the story was really intriguing, and some of the things that she said that I don't have a frame of reference for is most drug sellers or drug dealers are not dealing for profit. They're drug users that are trying to facilitate an addiction. And I think commercially, from TV, we watch, Breaking Bad, or Better Call Saul, and there's a criminal syndicate trying to make money, or The Sopranos, and that's what we equate to drug dealers. And in her experience, she's saying, no, that's not the case. These are people that are trying to use drugs. But the one thing she said that made me stop in my tracks was, and I'm going to try to reference this statement well.
I've got the quote if you need it, because I think it's the same one.
So say it. Let's see if it is the same. Well, the one she said was, you go. I think you have it a little bit more clear than I do.
Yeah. So this was when she actually went down for it. So she was saying about her friend that only at that point, when he had died, did the government value his life. So it was prior to that, when he had this addiction and this issue of using regularly, they're not there for him. They chuck him in jail, made the usage worse, didn't reduce his drug use or his issues at all. And it's only when he was dead did they seem to value his life.
Yeah. And it puts into context the value or the cost of incarceration and what are the outcomes of incarceration. Because I think people fairly confidently agree that people that are going into prison, let's say that aren't offenders, that go in for, let's say, 20-year minimums in this case, there is a very good possibility they come out being criminals because that's who they're associating with. I think there's a lot of truth, and this goes to when you're growing up. There's a lot of truth that you act like the people that you associate with, and
totally.
It's very difficult to associate with people that are on the right path in prison. Given the way prison system is in America, it's got to be a very difficult place. I saw people being interviewed in Canadian prisons, and they were saying, yeah, this is an American prison. This is a bit more, you just go there, you get on with it, and nobody really bothers you. Where I don't think that's quite the case in the American prison system. But what I found intriguing this week was I spent 2 hours reading up on this, and I was Googling, searching for why we should criminalize drug users or illicit drug users. I couldn't find a thing. The only thing I could find was Jeff Sessions, who was I think he was the Attorney General at one point in the Trump administration, was pushing harsher maximum minimum, mandatory minimums. That's it, mandatory minimums. So in other words, you get 20 years automatically, whatever the context of your drug conviction is. And that was I couldn't find a single argument for it. And that's what I wanted. I wanted somebody on the other side to explain to me why criminalization is a good thing. Is there any good reason?
Yeah, I watched a documentary on racism. Is it 13th on Netflix? It's about the Black Lives Matter movement, and it focused quite heavily at one point on the incarceration of Black individuals and the unfair incarceration and how the numbers just dramatically rose over the last kind of 50 odd years. What came out from that is there are huge beneficiaries of people going into the American prison system, which I was totally unaware of. There are corporations and businesses that profit massively off that, and they'll actually then use those people kind of like slave labor, essentially, getting them to do certain tasks for them at a minimal fee. So there are people, unfortunately, that are benefiting off the back of people going to jail.
Yeah.
And that is not a benefit for society. It's a benefit for financial reasons for certain companies. But unfortunately, that in itself and no other reason may be enough for this to keep going and to keep moving forward and have enough resistance to try and to prevent this being turned around. So, yeah, I'm not actually that surprised that you've said that you kind of turn around and suggested it. But from my world, the one thing that I kind of had any thought about doing drugs wise, I know I did weed, I've smoked that, but with steroids, I gave that some consideration when I was a teenager because I was into weight training. And I spoke to someone about it who had used, and he basically said it's amazing, it's phenomenal. However, as soon as you stop using, it drops off automatically. So you've got to be prepared for that. And in my head, even it's like young teenage age, I thought, and he said it's so if you're going to have a problem coming off it, you're either all in or not. And I thought, you know what, I don't want that. I think I'll just prefer to not have that massive, I prefer to be more consistent with it. But when you look at steroids, it's like but it's still an underground market. It's still something that isn't used, but there are far worse things out there than that. It can be used safely as well, or safer. It can be used in moderation to a lower level that can be like okay in an unprofessional air quotes that I'm using there. But and I'm not a doctor. I know nothing. Don't listen to what I'm saying. But there are a lot of things that are demonized, and steroids, with it being sport and this right and wrong, you're a cheat, is that it's got this kind of persona around it. And yet cigarettes, I can go and buy down the street and there's zero goodness coming from that. That's just tar from my lungs. And yet that's fine. And actually, I've heard someone talk quite eloquently about some of the negative effects to coffee, and that this will come out at some point. But at the moment, the coffee branches like Starbucks and Nero are just plowing into it, and it's just we've taken over it. We're in love with coffee. It's nothing but good, and I know you're a massive fan of it. But
Yeah,
it was really interesting to hear a counter argument. It is a drug. Caffeine is a drug, and we should absolutely not be giving it to younger kids. Like you should, like an adults, much like it should be treated like alcohol. There's nothing wrong with alcohol when you have it once a week, a couple of times a week in low doses. It's fine. But we absolutely shouldn't be having it in high doses every single day when people use coffee for the same thing. So again, just to take it slightly off branch, I just wanted to give a couple of examples where something like steroids is demonized, which it can be used safely. Something like coffee is just like with an everyday drink that people consume by the bucket loads, which has detrimental effects. So we've got a very skewed binary view of drugs in general in society. And I think overall it needs addressing. I would totally agree with what she says without having to go to prison. I can't see being incarcerated helping at all, being around those, the type of people that use. So,
yeah.
What are your thoughts, buddy?
When I did the reading on it, when I was looking into the benefits of, let's say, incarceration, there was one quote that I came across, or one person talking about it, and this was a doctor. And he was very much in agreement that we spend way too much time and money. And this was a totally separate interview. I'll put the link in the description, actually. And in it, actually, I probably can show it because it's not a very long. I'll put the link in the description. And in it, he was saying that he struggles to understand why we put so much money, time, and investment into incarceration when we really should be investing into people before they get to that point.
Absolutely.
Or at the point that they get into trouble, instead of investing in, because it's not only the cost of incarcerating, but it's the cost of prosecution as well, policing and trying. So even the criminal justice system is not cheap to go through. And I really think that there's a point there. Now, what he did say is to sort of not counter that, but he made the point that he had a cousin. It was a cousin or his brother, somebody that was close to him, was a drug abuser. And thankfully, had it not been for his arrest, he wouldn't have gotten the help he needed. So the other point he made was the not necessarily criminalizing it, but making it illegal. So there's a few different things that I've read. There's decriminalization, which means you don't go to prison, but that doesn't make it legal. Criminalization, and the other thing is these mandatory minimums are what really are driving the populations in the prison system. So people are going to jail, and again, that mandatory minimums essentially means no matter what the context, you're going to jail for 20 years, because that's the minimum for this. And the idea is if we crack down and we make it tough, then people aren't going to do it. There's countries like I think Iran, China, Malaysia, where they'll put people to death for having a modest amount of illicit drugs on their person, whether they're selling it or using it. So there's an element where people need to get that help, and it's how they get that help and what happens to them afterwards. And I don't see any reason why they should be in prison afterwards. And I couldn't find a single argument for that. It blows my mind away. I just don't get it.
And if it worked, even if it off the back of it, there was a higher percentage of people that came through it. And again, I suppose we don't have this data, but you could think that's maybe a strong argument, that it might seem stern, but this really going through the prison system does reform people and reduce drug use and antisocial behavior. But that doesn't appear to be the case, and that actually either exacerbates the problem already, or it can, undoubtedly, it can change people. I know a couple of people that have been to prison, and I think it was on lighter charges, to be fair, but still hearing some of the different opinions of what it was like, you could see people, it's changed them forever, and they will never be the same again, and will skirt any gray area with the law. And there are other people where it just harbors the same, and you're being associated and maybe even learning how to be a better crook. So it's a very complicated issue. There is a huge amount of factors in all of this. And yeah, I think her point is spot on. Incarceration isn't the be all end all. It's not going to solve everything. I actually, and yet the thing what I find a little frustrating is when you have something like the financial crash in 2007-8, and not one person within the financial industry went to jail for their crimes that they did.
Yeah, it's
like if anyone else, it's unbelievable. and yet this woman was put down to serve 20 years for accidentally, just trying to help a friend. Actually, that was her intention, to give her friend what he needed at the time. Her intentions were in the right area. It was just in the wrong form, and then ended up killing. Like, that's a life sentence in itself. She will never be the same individual with that. So yeah, it's a really complicated issue, but I'm always a fan of going to solve the root cause rather than plastering over the cracks, and it appears that prison is that. It's just a quick it's a quick fix that can work for some people, but clearly doesn't for others. So I'd be very interested to see how this this lightening up of the smaller amounts actually does in Oregon.
Yeah, I think with drug abuse, when we talk about crime in drug abuse versus crime in, let's say burglary, theft, people who are violent, people that get in fights, that sort of thing. And I'm saying not connected to drug use. There's very different motivations that go into that, and different intentions as far as who needs to be incarcerated and who doesn't. Yeah. And when you look at the data around the world, and I looked at a lot of stats, and when you look at the countries where they have death sentences for drugs, crime is generally low in those countries, but the instance of abuse, or the percentage of illicit drug users in that country, is not lower than that of, let's say, Portugal, which is the shining example around the world of a country that decriminalized drug use. If anything, those countries were in the top 10% of illicit drug users by population. So there's no real data to say that stiff penalties stop drug abuse. And when you look at Portugal as an example, what I was reading was, Portugal, she used Portugal where crime dropped, drug abuse dropped. It wasn't necessarily the case. The first 5 years after Portugal decriminalized, their experimental drug use went up, which was somewhat expected. Crime went up quite a bit. And what the article I was reading, it was in the New York Times, was talking about, saying that it's difficult to know whether that is it is a byproduct of decriminalization, but the drug markets and the people that sell drugs, they're quite reactive to changes in let's say crime changes in how the law adjudicates drugs. And that's not related, but there was data that showed that drug abuse was going down. HIV instances of people with HIV were going down, and there was a lot of benefits that were happening, not so much in crime, but in the number of drug users around the country. But also there was, when you look at the data, you can say, okay, well, crime is up, but that means that police have more time to, let's say, go after other forms of crime that are a bit more black and white. So it's right now, the data that's coming out of Portugal is not black and white. And for me, I look at it as a moral issue. Right now, I don't think it's an issue of what's the right thing to do statistically. I think these are people that are sick that need help, and putting them in prison is not helping them. It's kicking them to the curb and saying, you should have known better. Come back to us when you've sorted yourself out in this cell with all of these other people. And that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement, mate. And I think it's a strong word, drugs in general. It has that strong connotation to it. And I think we have to remind ourselves that caffeine, tobacco, and alcohol are drugs which are deemed acceptable in society. And there are other drugs that aren't deemed acceptable, which I think, and I'm not saying I fully support it, but we should, I think, look at it more holistically in a whole level. We have these bad drugs and good drugs, and I think there is an argument that certain drugs in certain moderation are actually okay. If we are, such as if we are allowing tobacco every now and again and alcohol every now and again, then if we were to use that type of methodology and thought with other drugs, how much more would that open it up? So there are things like heroin, which it doesn't appear that that's one that you can just sample and be okay with on a smaller basis. I think that's something that people get the addiction for that, and it dramatically changes their life, and there's no going back from it. So there is a scale to this at the moment, but I think that scale also needs adjusting for our society.
Yeah. When we look at all those things that we're not calling drugs, even when you look at caffeine, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out with caffeine. all of those things, you can find benefits, even in alcohol. There's going to be some study somewhere that'll cite some sort of benefit with moderate this, that, or the other, or there's societies that have longer lifespans who maybe drink a bit more, but there's other factors into their lifestyles that there's always some sort of argument that can be had. Whereas when you look at some of the illicit drugs, cocaine, for example, it's very difficult to find any benefit from cocaine. And it's those are a little bit easier as far as being able to identify right now, this is a problem and we need to get help for it. And it's, to me, that's what's so bonkers about it is you can make an argument for caffeine. So Phil Mickelson, for example, professional golfer, he had some health issues and his doctor said, you need to drink quite a bit of coffee. There was a specific issue he had, and there was something with coffee. There was some, I don't know what, I watched an interview with it and I can't quote exactly what the issue was and why coffee or caffeine even fixed it. He was drinking like 3 cups of coffee a day in the morning. But when we start looking at things like heroin and cocaine, no doctor's going to say, well, actually, cocaine's quite good for blood flow. So maybe just do, a hit of cocaine once a day and we'll be okay. But because cocaine, heroin, let's say illicit drugs are so black and white that we know that there's no real beneficial outcome from those, you'd think that would be okay. Yeah, we need to help somebody. These are problems.
I would even argue that there may be circumstances, because I don't understand it enough, and that people. I'm aware that people had this back in the day, like World War One, and it might be in war zones. There might be situations where people do have to down a load of alcohol because I'm just about to chop your leg off. There may actually be situations where cocaine or maybe even heroin could be suitable in a certain dose because of an operation or something. But I mean, I don't obviously understand it enough, and I think there's probably far healthier alternatives to it.
But this was the issue with weed. Oh, sorry.
No, go on, mate.
So this was the issue with weed for quite a long time, marijuana, because it was illegal in so many countries. Doctors or scientists couldn't study it and study the benefits of marijuana or THC. So there's no definitive proof or outcomes right now, but there's a lot of evidence coming out. Some of the extracts from marijuana as an example, because now we can study it. We can see the long-term use is good and bad. So for all those people that are saying marijuana is good for you, we now can start getting some data to say, well, no, the data actually says if you smoke too much, you're going to X, Y, and Z. It's going to do this to your brain. Whereas before, we only really had we didn't really have good research on it because it was just based on how drug abusers behave. And drug abusers usually don't just do marijuana. So things like, we start seeing, one of the things I found intriguing, we spoke about this. There was an NFL football player who came out and this is, he was attacking opiates. Opiates, am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was taking a lot of NFL players when they would finish a game, because it's a car crash every game. And they're so strong and so well trained in inflicting damage. You would have like soreness for days on end. And those long-term players in the trenches really struggle to deal with the pain each week. And they would get some sort of a lot of them are hooked on opiates or opioids. That's it. And this player privately was smoking weed or smoking. I forget what he was doing. I don't know if he was smoking it, but he was, I sound like such an old guy. He was smoking drugs. I don't know how to sound any dumber, but he was using marijuana. And he said, I would feel great after the game. I wouldn't feel like when I would do opioids or do opiates. I don't even know what the fuck to call it. When I would take some sort of an opiate, let's say oxycodone, or I don't know what they would give him in the NFL. He would feel out of it, and it wouldn't even last that long. And 24 hours later, he would be sore, and he'd have to take another one to feel better. And he said when he was using marijuana, he would just have some marijuana after a game, just use it a little bit. And he said he felt great, like the pain relieving elements of that. And this was his view, and he was sharing his anecdotal evidence. But that
he's not on his own there. There are plenty, like UFC fighters now, they are permitted to take it when they're out of training camp, which again seems ridiculous. That you've got these people fighting. It's not a performance enhancer. It's something that is going to help people like recover, and it's anti-inflammatory. So it has those properties, and again, I think that's fairly well founded that it has those properties. However, there are quite severe, in some cases, mental side effects which are not great. And I kind of noticed that in myself, which is one of the reasons that I stopped taking it. I got a bit more paranoid, and I think I'd have to use it in real small doses for it to be effective in me. But I know other people, and I'd hazard a guess that someone like you, I don't think you would have the same impact that it would have on someone like me. And that's the problem with this stuff. Like, that doesn't mean weed is good or bad. It means that it's a powerful compound. It has some fantastic benefits which are beneficial to human beings. And yes, it also has some very powerful components and properties which are not beneficial for human beings. And you always have then the argument of the gateway drugs, that it can lead on to other things. So I've seen that in other people as well. I've seen them start there and go somewhere else. So it's I don't know. I just think it's very difficult, and I just don't like the way that we demonize some and not others. And I don't like the term drugs in general. It just has a bad connotation to it, and it's like money. Is money good or bad? Money isn't either of those things. It's a tool to get things done. You could be a drug dealer and use your profits to kind of, really destroy towns and cities, or to do bad things to people, or you can use money for foundations and to cure disease and to create technology that benefits people's lives. So it's neither of those things, but you just have to respect it and use it as force for good. And I think where I'd like to finish on this is on the drug side of it. I wish that we could be a little bit more open-minded with it and look to, even though it's illegal, let's try and push back on that a little bit and try and see if we can do tests. The ethical side is where it gets difficult, but to try and support research to be done in a safer environment as possible, to push those boundaries, just to see where the good potentially is. I understand that's very difficult, and I think psychedelics is another thing. Psychedelics is another realm which again is demonized, and I think there are huge benefits to that. There are dangers to it as well, but it's an area that I'm very intrigued with, and the US is really pioneering that area at the moment. And a fascinating topic.
Yeah, well, when you look at those examples you gave, and I think that's a good point to finish on, those examples you gave where we reference the popular opinion, and right now it's an opinion as far as I'm concerned, in my view, that weed is a gateway drug, or that, not an opinion, for some people, weed has an impact that makes them paranoid.
It is and it isn't, yeah.
But where we're at it culturally is we're in a situation where we're using data points or anecdotal evidence that's not consistent enough to be able to draw conclusions from. So if we look at the example of you feeling paranoid, where did you get that weed? What was it something that was professionally made? And it could be that just the non-commercially available marijuana is tainted, and it is making you feel that way. Or maybe there's ways that can be produced that you don't have that. I know that people that take edibles don't really have that. My brother, this is all anecdotal. My brother has talked to people who've taken edibles. It's not legal in New York yet, but he knows people in some states that have taken edibles that will only take edibles because they don't feel paranoid. Again, more anecdotal evidence. And I've also read studies that said the whole idea that marijuana is a gateway drug is bunk. And I've read studies that say, well, maybe it isn't. But we haven't had enough data in to really make a determination because it's been illegal for so long. We can't properly study these things. So so to make conclusions on that, it's a lot of that's going to be down to, like you said, it's a demonizing word, drugs. Yeah. But then when you expand that the realm of what is a drug, is it caffeine? Because if it's caffeine, that's the same as Coke. They're both drugs. They're chemicals that make you feel a certain way. So if we break it down to that point, maybe we need to start looking at these drugs not as criminal vices necessarily, but as things people are taking, almost take the emotion out of the term and dig into them.
Get more educated on it, really. You're trying to really, fully understand that. Again, steroids is a good example. It's banned in sport, but actually, should it be banned if people do choose to take that route? And yet people that go to fast food restaurants 3 times a day, that's fine to do that. That's not a drug. So sugar is a drug. It's a toxin. You could, I think there's a fair argument that you could class it in some of the people are totally addicted to it and cannot live without it in some of the same properties. So I think myself included with the whole nation needs to be, and the whole world needs to be more better educated on the pros and cons, like equally both, not one side or the other, just looking at it from the scientific perspective and trying to break that down. And also appreciating the fact that we're all individuals here, that those compounds are powerful and they have different effects on other people. So just because 1 in 10,000 people could get schizophrenia, and those are made up numbers, by the way. Let's say 1 in 10,000 gets schizophrenia from marijuana, should be banned for that purpose. I wouldn't like to rule the planet like that personally, if those were the stats. If 9,999 could potentially benefit from it in a stable, mindful way. So, yeah, very interesting conversation. Hugely complicated. I'm nowhere near enough qualified for it, but very intrigued to see where it goes. And the US are really flying a flag with it, especially in certain states. So I'm interested to see whether that washes through the rest of America and also into the UK or not.
I'd be interested as we evolve this channel. One of the things I'd like to see us get to is where we can start doing call-ins, where people can call in and share their experiences and
I'd love that
and opinions.
Yeah.
And that's where we start when we start seeing more people, and we are starting to see more people trafficking the channel. And it's not that we aren't the arbiters of knowledge, but I like the idea that we can host a conversation that invites any idea and gives it time and gives it space. Any idea really. And I love to hear, just so that people can come into a forum and hear points of views and hear stories from other sides, because you and I have very similar interests and very similar opinions on many things. I think the next pod show we're going to be doing here in the next 20 minutes, I think we may have slightly differing opinions from what I can gather, but for the most part, we tend to agree on things. So
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this part of the show up now, and we're going to log off and log back on again, as we have for anyone who's made it this far, we're going to be reviewing the Netflix revival of Karate Kid, Cobra Kai. And yeah, it's mentally messed me up this week, I think, but I've got a lot of I can't wait to talk about it. So for anybody who's made it this far, thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe. I'm going to start putting subscribe buttons in, because we're actually getting a lot of watch time in minutes, and 98% of the people watching our content for a long time aren't subscribing. So if you are watching, subscribe and turn off notifications. That's fine. We just want to get more traffic and more people into the conversation. So what's coming up next? We're going to be talking Cobra Kai, and I look forward to seeing everybody in the next 10 minutes.